My name is Sean, and if you'd asked me a month ago, I'd have told you I was married to my soulmate. Lauren and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We didn't have kids, by choice, and our life revolved around our careers, weekend getaways, and shared passions like cooking and hiking. I thought we were one of those couples people envied, effortlessly happy, deeply in sync. But life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. It started with a series of small changes: Lauren working late more often, her phone glued to her hand, and her newfound interest in self-care weekends where she'd leave town for a day or two to recharge. I noticed, but I didn't question it. I trusted her. Trust. That was the foundation of everything we had. And it was that trust that made what I was about to discover all the more devastating. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about lies so tangled they tripped over themselves. It's about two strangers who unknowingly unraveled the same secret. It's about how my perfect life shattered into pieces I never saw coming. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the first crack in the facade appeared. I was at work, buried in emails, when I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was brief but hit like a sledgehammer. "Hi Sean. You don't know me, but I think you need to know about Lauren. Can we meet?" The message sent a chill through me. My first instinct was to ignore it, chalking it up to spam or some weird prank. But the tone felt too deliberate, too personal. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Who are you, and what are you talking about?" The response came almost immediately. "My name is Ben. I've been seeing your wife." My breath caught in my chest. I stared at the message, my mind refusing to process the words. Ben? Who the hell was Ben? And what did he mean, seeing my wife? I called the number without thinking. It rang twice before a man answered. "Sean," he said, his voice steady but cautious. "This better not be some kind of joke," I said, my voice low and sharp. "It's not," he said. "I don't know how else to say this, but I've been involved with Lauren for about 2 months. I didn't know she was married until yesterday. She lied to me, said she was single. I found out when I saw a picture of you two on her Instagram. I had to reach out." "You're lying," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt their hollowness. "I'm not," he said. "If you don't believe me, I can prove it. Let's meet. I'll show you everything." I agreed, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. We decided on a coffee shop near my office. When I arrived, Ben was already there, sitting at a corner table with his phone in hand. He looked to be in his early 30s, well-dressed, and clearly uncomfortable. "Sean," he said, standing as I approached. I didn't shake his hand. "Let's get this over with," I said, sitting down. He nodded and slid his phone across the table. On the screen were messages between him and Lauren, flirty, explicit, and undeniable. My stomach turned as I read them, each word a dagger. She had told him she was divorced, that she was looking for a fresh start. She'd even sent him photos of herself in our bedroom, on the bed we shared. "How did this start?" I asked, my voice tight. "We met at a networking event," Ben said. "She was charming, funny. I thought we clicked. She suggested we meet up, and it just happened." I felt sick, but I wasn't done. "Is it still going on?" "No," he said quickly. "I ended it as soon as I found out about you." I had no idea she was lying. I swear. I believed him. There was something about his demeanor, earnest, almost embarrassed, that told me he was telling the truth. But it didn't make the betrayal any easier to stomach. After a few more questions, I left the coffee shop, my head spinning. I needed answers, but I couldn't confront Lauren yet. I needed to see if there was more to uncover. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and suspicion. I started paying closer attention to Lauren, her habits, her excuses, the way she clutched her phone like a lifeline. That's when I noticed something strange. She wasn't just texting on one app, she was constantly switching between 2. Curious, I waited until she was in the shower and checked her laptop, which she'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter. There it was, a second messaging account. And another name I didn't recognize, Evan. I clicked on the messages, and the pit in my stomach deepened. She'd been talking to him for nearly 3 weeks, and the messages were just as damning as the ones with Ben. Evan was another man she'd met, this time through a hiking group. They'd been meeting up during her self-care weekends, staying overnight in cabins she'd told me were for solo retreats. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Not only was she cheating on me, but she was juggling 2 separate affairs with men who had no idea the other existed. By Friday, I'd reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I called Evan. He answered on the second ring. "Hello? Is this Evan?" I asked. "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name is Sean," I said. "Lauren's husband." There was a long pause. "Her husband?" he said, his voice laced with confusion. "Yes," I said. "I'm guessing she didn't tell you that." "No, she didn't," he said slowly. "I had no idea she was married." "She's been lying to you, just like she's been lying to me," I said. "You're not the only one. There's another guy, too." "Wait, what?" he said, sounding genuinely shocked. "Ben," I said. "You're not the first, Evan, and you're probably not the last. She's been playing both of you." Evan swore under his breath. "I can't believe this," he said. "I thought she was different." "Well, now you know," I said. "And now I know. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" For the first time in days, I felt like I had some semblance of control. Lauren thought she could outsmart everyone, that her lies would go unnoticed. She was wrong. The 3 of us, me, Ben, and Evan, met that weekend at a bar. It was surreal, sitting across from 2 strangers who had unwittingly been part of the same tangled web. We compared notes, shared details, and pieced together the full extent of Lauren's deception. By the time we left, we had a plan. Lauren's world was about to collapse, and I was going to make sure she had no one to blame but herself. The plan was simple: confront Lauren in a way that left no room for denial, no space to spin her lies. It wasn't about yelling or causing a scene, it was about forcing her to face the reality of what she'd done, to see her world unravel in real time. We chose a neutral location, a small, quiet cafe where I knew she wouldn't try to run or deflect too loudly. Ben and Evan agreed to meet me there ahead of time. We coordinated so that I'd bring her in first, and they'd walk in separately to join the conversation. On Monday morning, I casually told Lauren I wanted to grab coffee together before work. She seemed hesitant but didn't argue, likely thinking this was my way of softening up after a tense few weeks. She didn't know the storm waiting for her. At the cafe, we sat near the back. Lauren was dressed impeccably, as always, her smile tight but pleasant as she sipped her latte. "So, what's this about?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," I said. She stiffened slightly, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Okay." I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "Who is Ben?" Her expression didn't change immediately, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes before she masked it. "Ben? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't do that," I said firmly. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know who he is. I know what you've been doing with him. And if you try to deny it, it's only going to make this worse." Her face paled, and her composure faltered. "Ethan, I don't." "And while we're at it," I said, cutting her off, "why don't you tell me about Evan? Or do you not remember him either?" Her jaw dropped, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she said nothing, clearly trying to process how I could know both names. "Ethan, I can explain," she stammered. "I'm sure you can," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And you'll have plenty of time to do that. But first, let's make this conversation a little more interesting." I nodded toward the door, and as planned, Ben walked in. Lauren's head snapped around, her face going from pale to red in seconds. "What is he doing here?" she asked, her voice rising. "You tell me," I said calmly. "He seems to know you pretty well." Before she could respond, Evan walked in next. If Lauren looked shocked when she saw Ben, she was utterly dumbfounded now. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Surprised? I asked, unable to hide the bitter satisfaction in my voice. You should be. Because this is what happens when your lies catch up to you. Lauren stared at the three of us, her face a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. What the hell is this? She finally managed. This, Ben said, stepping forward, is your reckoning. You lied to me. You lied to him. You lied to all of us. I didn't, she started, but Evan cut her off. Don't even try, he said, his voice hard. You played all of us like fools, Lauren. But it's over now. We know everything. She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. Ethan, I can explain. Please, just let me. Explain what? I snapped. How you thought you could juggle 2 affairs and a marriage without anyone finding out. How you lied to my face every single day while sneaking around with them. Go ahead, Lauren. Explain it. Her composure shattered. I made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. That's your excuse? Ben said, his tone dripping with disdain. You didn't mean for it to happen? What, you just tripped and fell into an affair? Twice? It wasn't like that, she said, tears streaming down her face now. I was unhappy. I felt trapped. I wasn't thinking clearly. So, instead of talking to me, instead of working on our marriage, you decided to blow it up, I said, my voice cold. You didn't just hurt me, Lauren. You hurt all of us. Did you even care about what this would do to anyone but yourself? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I didn't know how to stop, she whispered. It got out of control, and I didn't know how to fix it. Evan scoffed. You didn't know how to stop? That's the best you can come up with? For a moment, none of us said anything. The only sound was Lauren's quiet sobs. Finally, I stood up, looking down at her with a mix of anger and pity. We're done here, I said. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. Don't come home tonight, Lauren. You can pick up your things when I'm not there. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Ethan, please. No, I said sharply. You don't get to beg. Not after this. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, Ben and Evan following behind me. Outside, the three of us exchanged a brief glance. Good luck, Ben said, clapping me on the shoulder before walking away. Evan nodded in agreement, muttering something about moving on before heading in the opposite direction. I stood there for a moment, the cool air hitting my face as I took a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally in control. When I walked out of the cafe, I knew one thing for certain: Lauren wasn't going to walk away from this mess without consequences. She had turned my life into a joke, betrayed me in ways I never thought possible, and lied to my face every single day. I wasn't going to let her come out of this unscathed. The first step was ensuring she had no way to manipulate the narrative. Lauren had always been the kind of person who cared about appearances, her job, her social circle, and the carefully curated life she portrayed on social media. If she thought she could spin this into some story that painted her as the victim, she had another thing coming. I started by gathering every piece of evidence I had. The screenshots of her messages with Ben and Evan, the photos she had sent them, and even the timeline we'd pieced together during our meeting at the bar, it all went into a single, damning file. I made copies and stored them in multiple places, ensuring she couldn't accuse me of fabricating anything later. Next, I reached out to our mutual friends. Lauren had always been the social butterfly, the one who planned parties and organized weekend get-togethers. Most of our friends were people she had introduced me to, but I knew some of them would be loyal to me once they learned the truth. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I sent a concise message to a select group, attaching a few key pieces of evidence. This isn't easy for me to share, I wrote, but I need you to know the truth about why Lauren and I are separating. She's been unfaithful not once, but twice. I'm not asking for pity, But I refused to let her twist this story into something it's not. The responses came quickly. Shock, disbelief, and even apologies for not noticing sooner flooded my inbox. A few people admitted they'd always thought something was off with Lauren's recent behavior but hadn't wanted to interfere. Their support was a small comfort in the chaos. Lauren must have felt the shift almost immediately. By the following day, she was texting me incessantly, alternating between anger and desperation. "How could you do this to me?" one message read. "You've ruined my reputation." "You ruined it yourself," I replied, keeping my responses brief. "Don't blame me for your choices." But that wasn't enough. Lauren still had connections, and I knew she'd try to salvage her image. That's when I decided to make the stakes personal. Lauren worked for a small boutique marketing agency, where her charm and networking skills had made her a rising star. The problem was, her personal and professional lives had started to blur, something I hadn't realized until I started going through her emails and social media. She'd brought Ben as her date to a corporate event, introducing him as a close friend, and she'd used work-related trips as excuses to meet up with Evan. I contacted her boss directly, sending a professional but detailed email outlining the situation. I didn't embellish or exaggerate, I simply presented the facts, attaching evidence that showed how her actions had crossed professional boundaries. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Within days, Lauren was asked to take a leave of absence while the company conducted an internal review. She called me in tears, accusing me of trying to destroy her life. "You did this to yourself," I said coldly. "All I did was shine a light on it." But the final act of my plan required Ben and Evan's cooperation. After some discussion, we decided to confront Lauren one last time, this time on neutral ground with all three of us present. I wanted her to face the reality of what she'd done, to see the destruction she had caused laid out before her. We chose a quiet park, far enough from any prying eyes. Lauren arrived late, her face pale and drawn as she approached the picnic table where the three of us sat waiting. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We want you to understand the damage you've caused," I said, my tone steady but firm. "To all of us." Ben spoke next. "You lied to me, Lauren. You made me believe you cared about me when all you were doing was using me." Evan nodded. "Same here. You played us against each other, and for what? To stroke your ego?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at each of us in turn. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said. I don't know. I was lost. I didn't know how to stop." "That excuse might work if this was one mistake," I said. "But this wasn't one mistake, Lauren. This was deliberate. Calculated. You thought you could get away with it, and now you're upset because you couldn't." She broke down then, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed. None of us moved to comfort her. This wasn't about punishing her, it was about making her confront the consequences of her actions. When she finally looked up, her makeup was smeared, and her expression was one of pure defeat. "I don't know what you want me to do," she whispered. "Start by taking responsibility," I said. "Stop playing the victim. Own what you've done. And then stay out of my life." With that, I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Ben and Evan followed suit, leaving Lauren sitting alone at the table. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Lauren's lies had unraveled completely, leaving her with nothing but the truth she'd tried so hard to avoid. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally start moving forward. It was nearly 2 weeks after our confrontation at the park when Lauren reached out again. I had ignored her previous attempts to contact me, texts, calls, even a handwritten note left in my mailbox. But this time, her message was different. "Sean, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need to talk to you one last time. Just us. No games, no excuses. Please." For reasons I couldn't entirely explain, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to see if she was capable of finally telling the truth. We arranged to meet at the house, a place that still technically belonged to both of us but no longer felt like home. She arrived on time, dressed simply, her face free of the makeup she used to wear as armor. It struck me how different she looked now, smaller somehow, less sure of herself. She stood in the entryway, hesitant, until I motioned for her to come in. We sat across from each other in the living room, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, Lauren spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said quietly. I didn't respond. I just waited, letting her sit in the discomfort of the moment. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back," she began. "And I know there's nothing I can say or do that will make this right. But I wanted to try to explain, not to justify." "Then start," I said, my voice flat. "Explain." She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know how it started, really. I guess I felt disconnected. From you, from myself, from everything. And instead of facing it, instead of talking to you about it, I took the coward's way out. I looked for distractions. First with Ben, then with Evan." "You looked for distractions," I repeated bitterly. "You mean you cheated?" "Over and over again." "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. "I cheated. I betrayed you. And it was wrong, Sean. I see that now, but at the time, I didn't think about the consequences. I only thought about what I wanted in the moment." I stared at her, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You had everything," I said. "A husband who loved you, a life we built together. And you threw it away. For what?" "I don't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I wasn't thinking about what I was losing. I was selfish, and I let my insecurities control me." "You weren't just selfish," I said coldly. "You were cruel. You didn't just hurt me, Lauren, you humiliated me. You made me question everything I thought I knew about our life together." She nodded, her tears falling faster. "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I studied her, trying to decide if her remorse was genuine or just another performance. Finally, I spoke. "Sorry isn't enough," I said. "It never will be. But I'll tell you what I need from you now." She looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and dread. "I need you to take responsibility for what you've done," I said. "No more excuses, no more blaming your feelings or circumstances. Own it. And then I need you to stay out of my life." She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll stay out of your way. I promise." "There's one more thing," I said, leaning forward. "You need to be honest with yourself. About who you are, about what you've done. Because if you don't, you're going to hurt more people. And I won't let you drag me down with you." She nodded, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her choices was finally crushing her. "I'll do better," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I'll try. For whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Lauren stood up, wiping her eyes. "I guess this is goodbye, then," she said, her voice trembling. "I guess it is," I replied. She lingered for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something else. But when I didn't, she turned and walked out the door. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting. I didn't feel relief, or closure, or even anger. What I felt was a hollow kind of acceptance, a recognition that the life I thought I had was gone, and there was no getting it back. But for the first time, that thought didn't terrify me. It felt like an opportunity to start over, to rebuild on my terms. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. After Lauren walked out that final time, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The house was still, the air heavy with the remnants of a conversation that had closed a chapter in my life. There was no triumphant sense of justice, no dramatic epiphany about the future. There was just quiet. In the days that followed, I focused on cleaning up the aftermath. The divorce was already in motion, and with no kids or shared business to complicate things, the process moved quickly. We divided the assets without much conflict. Lauren had little fight left in her after everything that had happened. The house, however, became a sticking point. She wanted to sell it and split the proceeds, arguing that it held too many memories for either of us to live there comfortably. I disagreed. The house wasn't just a monument to our failed marriage, it was mine. I had spent years renovating it, pouring my sweat and energy into making it a home. I wasn't about to give it up. In the end, I bought her out. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth it. Keeping the house was as much about reclaiming my sense of stability as it was about cutting ties with her. This was my space now, and I would rebuild it on my own terms. Lauren moved into a small apartment across town. I didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer them. The only communication we had from that point forward was through lawyers and the occasional email about finalizing paperwork. It was better that way, clean, detached, and impersonal. For weeks after she left, I avoided the parts of the house that reminded me of her. The bedroom was the worst. I slept on the couch for a while, not ready to face the place where she had laughed, cried, and ultimately betrayed me. Eventually, though, I decided enough was enough. One Saturday morning, I tore through the bedroom like a man possessed. I stripped the bed, tossed the mattress, and threw out every piece of furniture she had chosen. I painted the walls a deep navy blue, something bold and entirely different from the soft neutral tones she had favored. By the end of the day, the room looked completely new, and for the first time, it felt like mine. That small victory gave me the momentum I needed to keep moving forward. I tackled other parts of the house, transforming the spaces that had once felt tainted. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. Outside the house, I began to rebuild my social life. I reached out to old friends, people I had drifted away from during the years I'd been so focused on my marriage. Some of them welcomed me back without hesitation, while others were more cautious, unsure of how to navigate the situation. I didn't blame them, it wasn't easy to explain everything that had happened. One evening, I met up with a friend I hadn't seen in years. Over a couple of beers, he listened as I laid it all out, the lies, the affairs, the confrontation at the cafe. When I finished, he shook his head and said, "Man, you've been through hell. But you're still standing. That's what matters." His words stuck with me. I had been through hell, but he was right, I was still standing. Work became another anchor for me. I threw myself into projects, taking on extra assignments and even volunteering for tasks I would have avoided before. The structure and routine helped keep my mind focused, and the sense of accomplishment reminded me of what I was capable of. Occasionally, thoughts of Lauren would creep in. I'd catch myself wondering what she was doing, whether she was still trying to piece her life together. But those thoughts became less frequent as time went on. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. Anger had been replaced by a quiet indifference, the kind that comes when you finally let go of something that no longer serves you. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of us from our first year of marriage. We were standing on a beach, her arms wrapped around my waist as we smiled at the camera. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile the woman in the photo with the one who had shattered my trust. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. That version of us, young, hopeful, and naive, had taught me something important. I had learned what it meant to give, to trust, and to love fully. And even though it had ended in betrayal, those lessons were still mine to keep. Eventually, I put the photo in a box along with the others and slid it into the back of a closet. I didn't need to display it, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. As the months passed, life began to take on a new rhythm. I started going to the gym more regularly, something I hadn't done in years. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, like woodworking and hiking. I even joined a local club, meeting people who shared my interests. One evening, during a group outing, I found myself talking to a woman named Rachel. She was smart, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing in a way that felt effortless. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I told her as much. She smiled and said, "That's fine. Let's just see where it goes." And so, we did. Looking back, I realized that the experience with Lauren had changed me, not in a way that made me cynical or closed off, but in a way that made me more intentional about what I wanted in life. I had learned the value of boundaries, the importance of self-respect, and the strength that comes from surviving something you thought would break you. Lauren's betrayal had been devastating, but it hadn't defined me. It had forced me to confront truths about myself, about her, and about the kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. And for that, I was strangely grateful. As I stood on my porch one quiet evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The storm was over. And I was ready to move on.